Welcome everyone. Today's LinkedIn Live. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host for today. I'm going to do a little intro. I'm going to introduce our guests and then we'll get into the program. So our topic today is turning cold leads into hot sales, strategies to reignite interest. Excited for this one. Our guests here both have some really interesting perspectives and ideas. I think this is probably one of the more underlooked ways of developing business. I think any company that's looking to grow and scale, sales is a key factor. This could be a really great strategy for folks. So excited to dive into it. Before I introduce our guests, let me just do a little bit of housekeeping. So we are going to be on LinkedIn and YouTube here. I will be watching the LinkedIn comments. If you have a question or comment for anyone here, throw it into the comments on the LinkedIn page. We'll try to watch those. We'll weave them in. If you're on YouTube, jump over to LinkedIn. I'm not going to watch the YouTube comments. So jump over to LinkedIn if you want to leave those there. And if you're watching the replays, go ahead and put comments onto either LinkedIn or YouTube. We'll watch those in the coming days and weeks, try to get back to people there. So if you have a question or comment, throw it on there. We will watch it and appreciate that. So let me introduce our guests. First up, we have Nick Yorchak. He is founder of Big Footprint is a digital agency specialized in data-driven marketing. Their agency was acquired in 2022. He has over 15 years of agency sales and digital advertising experience, and he helps businesses optimize their online presence and scale growth through performance-based strategies. With all that, Nick, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Bruce.
It's a pleasure. Next up, we have Aaron Levenstadt. He is a seasoned entrepreneur, an exited entrepreneur. He has over 15 years of experience in performance digital marketing, including lead generation, online business development, lead closing. He's a former Googler, and he specializes in search marketing and analytics, helping businesses enhance their visibility and to drive results within the business. So with that, Aaron, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. So, I think there's lots of different ways to kind of start this, but I guess I want to start just by your own kind of personal kind of philosophy, or why do you see old leads or kind of cold leads as being, really kind of strategic and profitable? I'm kind of curious how you've kind of approached this and what's been your kind of philosophy around it. Aaron, why don't we start with you and then we'll hear from Nick.
Sure. So I'll start when I was running my agencies. So one of them was Pedestal Search. And what we noticed there was that we would have pipeline of cold leads, and there was a point in time where we didn't have a great motion around just continually following up with them and how to properly do that. And then once we got good at that and developed a system and a process to do personalized touch points with cold leads that were in the system, what we realized was that they actually would return hot at a pretty good clip, and that led to a lot of business being closed before the company was acquired. And it was very interesting to see how once we had a proper system around moving a lead that at one point was hot, but then turned cold, and then getting them warmed back up again, what that can do to the pipeline and the flow of pipeline from cold to closed. So that was a really important lesson that I don't think folks pay enough attention to. Like there's a consistent, hey, let's get more leads. Let's fill the top of the funnel. You have these cold leads that are often just sitting there. Just the question is, how do you properly pipe them back up? So that's my initial thinking around that.
Yeah. Nick, what's your take on the cold lead strategy?
Yeah, no, I think they're a gold mine. Obviously, as an agency owner or salesperson, there's plenty of deals you're not going to win for a variety of reasons, right? Whether it's timing, price. I mean, there's always going to be different objections, but I agree with Aaron that the focus can't always just be new leads, top of pipeline. The way I look at it is, if a company reached out to you or a lead, obviously they had some favorable impression of something you did, especially when they became a lead, right? So if you can try to tie back to that, or I know we'll get there, but something that we used to do was even looking at how far they got in the funnel, right? I would probably follow up with someone who we lost an RFP on very differently than if we got all the way to a contract phase and someone didn't sign, right? That's almost getting to the altar, so to speak, right? So I think there's obviously a lot of time that's been invested into them too. So there, obviously can be, I guess you can, kind of reuse that time or gain value from something that maybe you thought was a sunken ship, but no, actually maybe not. Maybe we can get this proposal back in front of them and already be at the signature stage, right? So I think they can be valuable for both revenue, but also a good use of time if you pursue them correctly.
Yeah. So a couple of questions here. So I think one is, just kinds of types of business or types of funnels. Do you see certain types of businesses or funnels being more having more opportunity than others? Meaning, certain business or certain offers are going to be fairly time based. It's like, I'm interested in purchase in a fairly particular window, and if I'm being contacted outside that window, I might, I don't have really purchase intent or purchase interest. But when I move into that window, that goes high versus, it's like, a general offer that, if you haven't really accepted the first time, the chances are you're probably not going to be interested later. Like, do you distinguish between certain types of businesses that this strategy is more applicable or is going to be more successful than others? I'll let either of you kind of chime in on that if you have opinions.
Nick,
I can throw some thoughts out there. I think for us, it would most likely be based on like the size of the company or the potential revenue. And I think, obviously it depends on what kind of agency you are. Certain agencies have a very specific ICP and let's say only work with healthcare companies of X size, for example, right? But if you're a more broad agency who has a variety of clients, I think I would, instead of maybe looking at it by industry, we used to look at it more by revenue potential. So if we had a pitch with a client and, they didn't give objection to a certain price, $25K a month. Okay, well, that's pretty good size. Let's treat them a little differently. So I think that would be my initial thought, is how we used to do it was break them up by potential revenue impact. The higher up ones would obviously get much more TLC. Smaller things, they may not be worth your time. We didn't necessarily see too much of a difference between the industry necessarily. It was more the company size. And you're also correct, Bruce, that certain companies we knew, and they told us in the sales conversations, oh, we have our, it's the end of year, so we're trying to do X, Y, Z. We have this buying window. Our fiscal year is
exactly
X, right? So you obviously have to play that game. But that's always something I would tell people on our team, make sure you write that down. We need to know that, right? So we don't hit them up in 6 months and they say, oh, that ship sailed, but I'll call you.
Exactly. Last week.
Yeah. All right. Okay, great. So we would look at it more by their potential revenue. If we were able to elicit that through conversations, that was always a lead that we would put, in a place where it'd get more attention if we had that type of information already. Even
kind of proportional attention to opportunity, as being kind of a calculation you do. Interesting. Aaron, how did you kind of, figure out which industries or which situations were more likely to kind of convert cold leads versus others?
So I wouldn't say that we saw like an industry related trend, specifically like on like a vertical basis, but what we would see was that, and you guys have both kind of touched on this, is that just throughout the sales cycle, like this is a B2B sales cycle. And throughout that sales cycle, there might be multiple people involved. You might not get everybody who needs to be in the conversation on the first or the second call. There might be a director or a mythical dragon that needs to be consulted at some point, right? There might need to, you guys mentioned like a budget might need to be just reset, and they love you. They're in love with you and what you do. They just need that like 3-month budget thing. And then the problem is they forget. Yeah. And if you don't have a system in place to do this, you forget. Right? Your team forgets. So it's more of, and this is why, one of the items I've been working on since my exit is a company called connectionpoints.io, which basically creates these systems for folks that are doing highly relational sales, right? So if you're an agency and your business doesn't really depend on like building a relationship through the sale, then this, like what we're talking about, I guess, to answer your question, would not be as applicable. But if you are, part of the sales cycle is building a relationship, building a sense of like trust throughout that sale, and building a connection that is going to be longer than a single touch point with a prospect, then having access to information to help you improve the quality of those conversations, that's where we really saw the needle move, is those kind of contacts.
Yeah. Let me ask this, because I think I want to get into kind of some of the strategies we use, but I want to kind of figure out how, if you do anything around the nature of the conversation you had or the engagement that you had with the lead and why it fell out of the funnel, if that changes how you approach this next stage. Like, I'm thinking of cases where, you get down to the final RFP or something like that, and they make it very clear of like you're missing some key capability or something that really is, you're just not a good fit, versus, hey, we had some great conversations and then they kind of went dark and we don't know what happened, but we think there's still opportunity here. Like those feel like slightly different for me. Is there any strategies or criteria that you use to figure out how to classify leads as being, hey, look, they're really dead and we don't have an opportunity, versus we need to put this into our nurturing and reactivation system, later? Is there any strategies or insights that you've developed there? Either one of you.
So I'll start on this one. I think to your point, Bruce, like if you've been told that you're just not the right fit for them, I probably would just like note that as they're not a qualified lead at that point anymore.
Yeah.
And I mean, that happens, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And what we would actually do is when I was working with our sales team, is we would attempt to do outreach in a way that tried to get them to say something like that.
Yeah.
So like the biggest problem that we find is you end up in this like quagmire of you're just not hearing back, or you're not hearing back with any material.
Yeah.
Oh, like you send an email and they're like, oh, we need a bit more time. End of message. So like you don't really know what's going on. At least that was our experience on like 93% of the time. I mean, sometimes you would get the clarity on like, hey, listen, like this is not going to happen for the next year because we just had a C-level change. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, well, like that and document it in however your CRM or spreadsheet or whatever system you're using, or you're not the right fit. Fair, that happens too. But what we found and what we see through connection points today is like most of the time you just don't really know what's going on.
Yeah.
So how can you attempt to create outreach that both affects that person, like it's meaningful to that person with a personalized element, but is at the same time trying to get them to either explain what was missing, or tell you to go away.
Yeah.
Because that's better than not knowing.
Yeah.
Right?
I always have this joke of dating, right? It's like, if someone tells me, well, I like guys with long blonde hair, like I'm gonna be like, okay, good luck. If they tell me they have a boyfriend right now, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna keep talking to you. Like those are two different situations. One might change, the other one is probably not. Nick, how do you kind of approach this kind of classification or categorizing deals, and whether they should go into reactivation or whether they should just be marketing?
Yeah, I think I would build a little bit with what you said, Bruce, where I think in my experience, what we did was looking at the reason we lost and how far into the sales cycle they got. So, on one extreme, you might have someone who you had multiple meetings, you maybe did a free audit, right? You built a whole proposal and then you got it to a contract. And then they said, hey, I'm really sorry, but we're choosing this agency for X reason, right?
Yeah.
I think that person is going to, obviously you'll remember a lot more from those conversations. You'll have a lot more notes, but I think in a conversation like that or a situation like that, my approach would be much more personal, to reach back out to them maybe 6 or so months in or something and say, hey, just checking in. How did that selection go? Do you feel like they're the right partner? Right? It's all about like chemistry type questions because they told us that. In another situation, let's say we just lost because we were too expensive, right? That might be the time to reach out and say, hey, I'm just, curious, how is your budget looking? Are you hitting the ARR or the MR you were seeking? Have you got that Series A yet? Right? It's all like financial based. So I used to find that more successful. I wouldn't just, kind of send everybody the same thing. How's that new agency working out? Right? It's more like, what objection did they tell me, or what was the reason they picked them? And then I can try to, maybe again, find an opening there, or to Aaron's point, if they just say, hey, we're happy with that, we're good. At that point, the nail's probably in the coffin, and you say, okay, well, that's probably a lead we can no longer call cold. It's dead. Yeah. Right. But I think there's Aaron said it pretty well. I mean, it's really about personalization, trying to remember as much as you can. Even the things that, again, seem obvious, but like asking them, how are your kids? Or, oh, I remember you told me you were into rock climbing, right? Are you getting any climbs in? I mean, you obviously don't want to act like you're their best friend, but I do feel like that stuff goes a really long way. Especially like if you were to tell a client, like, I remember you guys were seeking to hit X MRR to get to that Series A. Did that happen? Like, I imagine most salespeople are just sending them that same shotgun email of, would you like to have another audit, right? But there's no recollection of those key points, right, that are important to that prospect. So
you always find it a little creepy when like 3 years later someone reaches out and they remember some specific detail of something. I was like, oh my gosh, clearly someone put a note in a CRM system. We haven't spoken for 3 years.
Too fun.
So it's a little like there's a little bit of a double edge here, or a little bit of like how to capture the right information and then how are you going to use it in a way that is appropriate, meaningful, right, is going to actually help you in the sales process. It's I always get a little creeped out when some of those things come across. Let's talk a little bit about kind of these activation strategies. I think it's easy just to kind of throw everyone on an email list and send them a weekly email or something like that. What above and beyond just putting them into some kind of generic nurturing campaign, what are some things that you've done or you've seen successful in terms of staying in touch, right? Like keeping you top of mind, right? Opening an opportunity for additional conversation. What are some strategies that Aaron, why don't we go to you, just because I know you've been working on some of this stuff recently. What are you seeing that's actually working, or things that are beyond just the standard ticklers?
Yeah, so and exactly what you're saying, Bruce, like the problem that we're all facing today is that it is so easy to send an email or to get AI to rip out a message that goes to a 2,000 person list, and everybody knows that's a robodial, right? And it's just not, even if they're a prospect that you've spoken to recently, it's probably not getting replied to. So one of the key things, and this is the problem I'm thinking about every day now, is how to help people through this stuff, is one big part of it is a systemized approach to social listening. Mm-hmm. So let's just say you have 100 prospects that you're in conversation with, or 50 or 20 or whatever it might be, but part of what the system will do is it'll actually segregate those people specifically and then turn on like the equivalent of social media radar just for those people. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what can you then do with that, right? Well, some of it could just be like a quick reply, like you saw somebody went to the Stanley Cup game in Florida and you shot them a note, be like, hey, like, saw you at the game, what an amazing finish, right? It doesn't have to be commercial, right? That's not a commercial message, but something about them based on something that they're sharing that you're picking up on. Another thing that we saw happen recently was really cool, and this actually goes to what Nick was saying about like something may know about, like their kids, for example, is like, so one of our clients who uses the software, they saw that one of their prospects was posting about how their kid is like a fanatic about like BMWs and goes to like see BMWs and car shows. I think it's 5 or 6 year old kid. So what our client did was he basically just took like a quick note. I think he went to got one of those, I forget what they're, like the $10 plastic BMWs, the cars. Yeah. And he sent it to the prospect. Yeah. Immediately got a phone call and is now in conversation towards a contract. Yeah. So I'm not saying the BMW was the only thing, but it opened the conversation back up. Another thing that was just understanding, so another cool understanding where people are going and how they're spending their time, and then how you can strategically be there. So another quick story is another one of our users basically figured out that his prospect was going to a conference that was like 45 minutes away. Yeah. And if he wasn't listening to the social media, that person's social media, he would not have known that. But if he ended up at the same conference, had an organic conversation with that person, and they're now in the middle of getting the deal done. Yeah. So these kinds of approaches with the intelligence that you can get to help drive that, I think that's what's making a big difference in a world, in a world where, where like the email stuff, it's just so much of it. So that's where I'd love to hear Nick's take on that.
Yeah, Nick,
what we're seeing.
What are you seeing out there in terms of strategies?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think one of the things that we did is we would basically look at drip email by tiers, and I'll just give you the kind of the full view there. Like the top tier would be, again, someone who we've had multiple conversations with, perhaps already gave a price. We know what they want. We either did an audit or a contract, or right. It wasn't just like someone who registered for a white paper and, we never spoke to them, right?
Yeah.
That kind of tier would get, a much more like personal approach, like Aaron's example with, remembering the BMW, or, like my other example of asking them on, how did that go on your Series A? Did you guys ever close that? Stuff like that. I think, if with drip email, there's still a place, I think, too, though, for that, what I would call like the lower tier, which is people who have just come into your company's network, either downloading a piece of content or maybe met them at a conference, right? But these would be all the truly cold leads where you've maybe had one conversation and it didn't really materialize, right? Do we pursue that? I think there is still a place for that. And the strategy I would call that is really more like knowledge building, right? So I would use drip email as a knowledge builder. So whenever we have a new white paper, whenever we had a person or myself speaking at a conference, whenever we were cited in a magazine, right? Whatever that is, right? That's when you would kind of send out that what I call the more blanket drip email, right? To everyone that you think has any potential of ever being a lead. And all the goal there is to just reaffirm, hey, our agency, we know what we're doing. So does the industry. They agree, right? Based on these recognitions. And we are offering you X. Right. And again, that's a whole science unto itself of what is your offer, right? As an agency. I've helped a few different agencies develop everything from like a healthcare agency I worked with. We created something called the Patient Journey Roadmap, right? Which was a paid audit whereby they were able to really quote someone more detailed. At Big Footprint, we used to call it the Opportunity Report, right? But it was a very specific audit. That was the goal to push them towards. But yeah, I think that only goes so far, right? So that knowledge building, that I think is when you have a better lead, like the one I talked about at the beginning, that's where I think you would still send that out, but say, hey, in addition, I saw this stat, or how's your kid in the BMW, right? That's where you're adding something a little bit more personal, but you can kind of kill two birds with one stone in that scenario, because the drip email is already illustrating your knowledge of a certain topic, right? That your agency cares about. What you then do is you just take the base of that, add a really personalized note, add some other, piece that's really going to help. And then I think that's kind of the two tiers I would divide it into. People who you had some relationship with, let's build on that, send them something more custom. Conversely, if it's just the rest of your funnel, that should really be more knowledge based. One other thing, I didn't come up with this, but props to Eiffel Media. Antonella is the founder there. But I saw something she came up with today. It's really great. She was offering, for clients who made a charity donation of a certain amount, their agency would give them a free audit. I think they're selecting like 5 people. So, they don't have to do hundreds of these. But I think that was a really cool idea too, of people who had a cold lead might say, oh, that's cool. We're already donating something. Why not get an audit out of it, right?
Yeah.
So that seems like a win-win for everybody. That's a much more specific tactic, but hopefully that's helpful. I just look at that drip email as a knowledge builder. And then you have this personalized tier where you have a much closer relationship with the person. That's a different strategy, but at least that's how
I do see a couple of strategies, and I've certainly seen this in some of the work I've done in companies that I've worked with. But there's kind of this kind of sending information out, right? So you mentioned we're speaking at a conference, or we just wrote this white paper, or there's an article, right? This kind of way of kind of staying top of mind, I guess, right? Kind of a regular cadence of thought leadership or information, just to kind of keep them aware of you. And then there's kind of these invitations to start a conversation, or invitations to engage kind of thing. Have you seen any interesting ways of kind of creating that invitation? So things that might various levels of engagement or kind of work that it would take, but ways of kind of creating an opportunity for them to start a discussion again, whether it's directly related to the work you're doing or their current situation, or maybe, I've seen people do like surveys and stuff like that, saying, hey, we're collecting information around the market. I know we've spoken to you previously. We'd love to kind of answer a couple of questions. We'll give you the summary of this afterwards. And anything unique and interesting that you've seen strategically work in terms of getting these conversations actually engage in some kind of conversation again? I don't know, Aaron, what you've seen in the work that you've been doing.
Sure. So I think the idea of like sending them information about your firm, like there's nothing quote unquote wrong with that. I just think when you're doing that, and this is kind of one of the outreach lessons that I've just seen again and again is it's hard to get somebody to reply when the message being sent is about you and not about them, right? So when you're sending information about your firm, whether it's an accolade, something that you guys have done that's great, a case study where you've really shone, that's about you, right? That's not about the person that's receiving it. So I think, you might, and this isn't easy to do at scale, but there's ways of doing it where you might want to think about, hey, that person is in, Nick was talking about a client that was in the healthcare space, right? So like, hey, I know that you're in healthcare, and by the way, I just happened to see this report that came out of RFK, where there's this really interesting thing going on, around making America healthy again, and this is what the report talks about. I know that this is healthcare. That you should read this, might be of interest to you. That's about them, even if it's really not that applicable to them.
Yeah,
that's still about them, and they understand that you're not just sending them, hey, we won this award, we'd love to work with you. It's about something that you're thinking about them in the send. I also think it's, if there's some sort of insights that you as the sender can gather that would be particularly helpful to the recipient, there's a way that you can get that on the table. I've even seen some hey, listen, the sender being hey, listen, we happen to have, we were at a conference where we ended up seeing this talk about this, would love to share with you what we learned, right? So you have some insights that you want to share with the recipient because they weren't at that conference and you happen to be, then you think it's really going to be helpful for them. I mean, genuinely helpful. I think that's an interesting way to open the door to a conversation.
Yeah. Nick, what's your take on how to strategize some of this engagement?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Aaron said there. And I think a personal example we used to use is that audit I was telling you about. We called it the opportunity report from Big Footprint. And it was an initial audit we would do to learn the client and obviously give them a price. Because I used to tell people, I can't just give you a price over the phone based on a 30-minute conversation or something, right? We need to obviously do a diagnosis here and really understand what we're doing. So we used to charge for that report. One of the things that I found helpful would be if we had lost a client who I knew was qualified and was really sad, oh man, that would have been the best client. Sometimes I would reach back out to them and either offer them a discount on that price or a complimentary audit as a way to try to kind of resurrect the lead, so to speak. The other thing, we were obviously very focused on digital marketing, so this may not apply to everyone, but we used to be able to tell with the various tools available, hey, look, your SEO, you guys have lost a lot of position in the last couple of months. Is everything okay? Right. And then it's very much to Aaron's point, this is all about them of oh shit, why are we losing rankings? I didn't realize that. What do you guys know? We don't know, right? Now, obviously you don't want to throw another agency under the bus, and that's not the goal there, but rather just to say, hey, I noticed this in your ranking portfolio. Or in a paid search scenario, you could say, hey, we saw from our third-party monitoring tools that you've either increased spend dramatically or lowered spend dramatically. Is there anything that you'd be seeking to understand there, or anywhere we can give you an opinion, right? That, I think that kind of stuff was really helpful too. And again, I know not that those tools don't necessarily exist for every agency, but for us, that was really helpful because the client would sometimes say, oh, how did you guys know that? That's pretty accurate, right? I know these third-party tools are just guesstimates, but oftentimes they were pretty close.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was something that we used to use was, like I said, discounting that audit or trying to use some of those third-party tools to say, hey, I noticed this big change. Is everything okay? Let us know if you need us in any way.
Yeah.
Right?
I'd love to get Aaron's on that, and then we're going to hit time in a second. I would say I would love to hear the signals. One of the things we used to use, I ran a technology consulting firm for a long time, and we would look at their job boards, right? Because we could tell who are they trying to hire, what kind of roles, what kind of skills, technologies, and then we could use that to kind of navigate. Hey, we've got a lot of engineers that know how to do this stuff. So there's lots of signals that companies are putting out. I'm curious, Aaron, what other signals are you talked about listening, right? Social listening, other than just kind of social media posts and stuff like that. Is there anything else that you've found you can kind of use to triangulate or to kind of understand what's going on in the prospects world?
Yeah. So, I mean, just to elaborate on social listening. So that can either be to try to open the door to a conversation, in the case of sending them a little BMW, a toy BMW for their their child. Another one would be like actually, if you in getting this social feed in that this is just your prospects, and then you can actually like mine that. So like anytime one of those people is talking about marketing or marketing strategy or or is asking their network a question that is related to in some way to what you or your agency is doing, you want to know about that right away. So getting that kind of notification, and again, this is what one of the things our software does is it lets you know about all that. So that is, I think, really helpful, because what you're doing, and obviously got to just do it right, but like you're inserting yourself in a conversation that person is trying to have at that exact moment in time, where, Bruce, to use your point of like their window of you're thinking about this is open. They're not thinking about something else and the window's closed.
Yeah.
So I think that's really helpful. I also think that just like speaking to people and just having that conversation of like, hey, like, anybody else in your world that's kind of thinking about this kind of thing right now, or that you think what we do could be helpful for. Whenever you're in one of the, whether it's over a Zoom call or at a conference in person or whatever, having those conversations too, as a way to understand what's going on in different people's worlds and who might be very receptive to a conversation. I think it's easy to over index on the AI stuff, but also just ask people too, right? Like have that human conversation.
Start the conversation. It feels like this whole area, I mean, there's obviously several strategies and kind of techniques, and it depends somewhat on the nature of the business and the prospects and stuff. But I think this whole, like, you've spent all this time and energy, right, creating the content initially, and just to kind of toss it aside and try to find new ones, it's like, it's an underutilized, unmined kind of resource for many companies. I want to make sure that people get contact information. Nick, if people want to get a hold of you, find out more about what you do, what's the best way to get that?
Yeah, sure. I think the best phone number for me would be 303-549-6259, or my email address is just my first initial last name, nyourcheck@gmail.com.
Excellent. And Aaron, how do people get a hold of you?
So LinkedIn's good. I'm the only Aaron Levenstadt, so I don't have a common name, so you can track me down there, and I'd love to hear from you. And then the other one is my email is Aaron, my first name, at connection points plural .io. You can also reach me there.
Perfect. There's one other Bruce Eckfeldt out there who's a fishmonger out of Seattle. So I'm not the only one, but bruce@eckfeldt.com is my email. Eckfeldt.com is URL, and obviously on LinkedIn. Nick, Aaron, I want to thank you both for taking the time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you everyone for joining us. Again, if you're watching the replay, leave comments and stuff there. We'll check them as we go. But gentlemen, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Nick.